Good morning and welcome to Gateway Rotary.
Good morning. Good morning.
How is everybody this morning?
We're great. September 8th.
Oh, you're messed up.
Yeah.
Let's see. Ed Johnson, would you please do the Pledge of Allegiance?
It is my pleasure. Fellow Rotarians and guests, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Lowell, would you please do the four-way test?
I would be happy to. Fellow Rotarians, please join me in the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do.
First.
First.
Second, fair all concerned.
Third,
We'll build goodwill and better friendships.
and fourth,
We'll be beneficial to all concerned.
and most importantly,
So I have no visiting Rotarians signed up. Are there any visiting Rotarians here besides our own Rotarians? Okay. And visitors. Crystal, you have a guest.
I do. I have Lacey with me one more time, and she is the membership packet, so hopefully.
Corinne, you have a guest.
I do. I'd like to introduce my guest, my husband, Jim Moeller.
And Tim, you have a guest.
I do. This is Mark Harris. He's a retired lieutenant now in the consulting business here locally in Lacey.
All right.
And next Wednesday is the Gateway Rotary Board meeting, so board members, please submit your reports to the secretary. Do not use your Dropbox, send an email, and she will get them out. And it's after our meeting here, next Wednesday, the 12th. Also, there are no meetings here December 26th and January 2nd. Listen, you guys.
What, is it a holiday or something?
Yeah, just a little bit. Crystal, you have some announcements.
Yeah, Crystal.
Tomorrow is our social at Swing Wine Bar downtown, so it starts at 4. Please come join me. Again, reminder, I know some of you, it's real close on 21. Must be 21 to attend, so come. It will
That's
be
the
fun.
social, right?
That's the social.
The social.
Yeah.
You weren't
Yes.
paying attention, like.
No, there's no special presentation. What?
Can I bring a friend?
You don't have any friends. You can.
I don't, can you?
Yes.
you may bring a friend, yeah. And then, wonderful, we have our student of the month. I'm just gonna read a little bit about Abigail. She, actually, my son goes to North Thurston Public Schools, and it made their newsletter that Rotary has a student of the month, so.
Nice.
Yay! I know, I was so excited when I saw that. So she is a senior at Timberland High School, and she was nominated by her sister, Jordan, and by a behavioral specialist at Camacho Middle School. She's given nearly 200 hours, so definitely service above self, of her time in the public schools, and she volunteers regularly at Lakes Elementary, helping students who struggle to be successful in class, as well as special events. She volunteers her time as the Lakes mascot, making appearances at events such as Kiwanis Day of Champions. She volunteers at Chambers Prairie and Camacho Middle School by assisting in classrooms, grading papers, helping with ASB events, and organizing military programs. She volunteers at her high school with Blazer Citizens, National Honor Society, and Teacher Academy. She is also involved with the Winter Warm Service Project by purchasing fleece and making blankets for a local missionary. Sorry, I'm reading this from the site. And she spent part of her summer helping students develop their reading schools with the REACH program sponsored by St. Andrew's United Methodist Church. So I definitely think she was deserving of the award. I'm so glad that we as a club have come together to help recognize these students. So
Cool.
there she is.
Oh, Santa's there, yeah.
Santa. Yeah, 2 of them.
You guys are all hallucinating again.
Yeah, we are.
So today is our annual meeting, so we need Len Fosher to please come forward.
Hey, Lynn Fosher.
It's an important meeting. Important, very important.
Wicked important. You're gonna do it right. All right, thank you. You guys have seen, we've been making the announcements for the last month. We've been sending out some emails on it. Today is our annual meeting and the election of officers for the 2019-2020 year, starting in July. So you should all have a ballot. If you don't, I'm gonna come back around again and I'm gonna make sure you have your ballots. And please fill them out. If you look over here, we have the box slate as presented. That's everybody that's listed there. You can just check that one box and everything's taken care of. However, if you would like to individually select things, as I just learned, that Barbara Perez puts jam on her eggs. So I'm kind of reconsidering what I might be doing, but I'm just putting that out there. Anyway, please cast your votes now. I will go. Does anybody not have a ballot? That's a member.
I'll bring
Yes.
one.
Okay, we'll give. Thank you. If you could just take care of that, I appreciate it. So everybody's got a ballot. I will come back around and start collecting the ballots in about 5 minutes, and we'll make an announcement at the end of the meeting on the final results. Any questions? Great, thank you.
Yay! Yeah.
Oh my goodness, it's going so fast this morning. Is everybody awake?
You're doing great.
Okay. So, we have a guest speaker this morning who again happens to be one of our very own. You know, those are my favorite. So, I'm going to introduce Randy Moeller. So, Randy is a founding member of our club. Yay!
Randy won.
He is known to us as our only physician, though not our only doctor. Doctor. All right. Randy came to Olympia in 1984 and established a career at Group Health. He retired last April and is not the least bit troubled by that, apparently. It's all good. His discussion today will be about preventing bad behavior. Yeah, good luck with that with this group. All right, so let's give it up for Randy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We'll get right. I'll do another. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, in the past when I've given talks, it's been about prevention. So, we gave a talk about vaccinations, about aging gracefully, and of course about traveling to the third world. Jonathan, so can you remember the 4 rules of traveling to the third world?
Yeah, don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't get bit.
Don't get bit.
Don't
Eat it.
Don't eat shit.
No. Bring your kid.
And bring your kit. You guys got it. See? So, do you know how gratifying it is to know that you teach and 4 years later someone remembers what you said?
We've had an impact.
Yes. So, prevention actually is going to be the weakest point of this conversation because how do you prevent bad behavior is actually larger than a 20-minute talk. But I'd like us to have an opportunity to understand and recognize causes of bad behavior. And so we're going to talk today about something called ACEs. That's the acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And I want to reflect on the effect that those have on adult health. So I wanted to start with a short video, and we can't do the connection, and I was going to play it in honor of Terry Farmer. It is a scene from West Side Story where the Jets are hanging out and looking aimless and like they're going to be in trouble. And Officer Krupke comes up to say, "What are you kids doing?" And they sing a song called Officer Krupke. And those of you who even know what West Side Story is, you might Google that because it's a really fun song. And I knew it when I was in 5th grade, which I don't know what that quite means, but it's very entertaining. And it was going to be what we set this talk off with. So so bad behavior obviously is not a medical term. So what do I mean when I say bad behavior? And so for purposes of the discussion, it means uncivil behavior, illegal behavior, using physical coercion to get your way, using emotional coercion, what we otherwise call bullying, to get your way, smoking, drinking, using drugs, and having risky financial practices. Those are the things I want to focus on that we don't like in other people and have their basis in our growing up. If you want to understand how to prevent something, you have to understand why it happens in the first place. So what do we know about why bad behavior comes? Well, historically, this is actually a religious issue. It was about the devil or some alluring force that would make you do wrong, and the way to make it right was to get good with God. And then after the Enlightenment, science became a form of authority that people would look to when the church didn't work for them. And how did that work out? Well, they came up with scientific ideas about bloodlines or genetics as a cause for bad behavior. So for the lawyers in the room, there's a great case. So social Darwinism and biological Darwinism culminated in the United States in a Supreme Court ruling by Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the 8-1 majority for it. It was called Buck versus Bell, 1927. This is the year my mother was born. And it basically supported the Virginia Sterilization Act of 1924 and forced sterilization on mentally defective people. So in Virginia in 1924, mentally defective or idiots meant they had bad behavior. They married out of wedlock, they had uncivil behavior, they couldn't get a job, they were recurrent criminals, or they abused drugs. So his summary at the Supreme Court meeting was one of the shortest that was ever recorded. And he wrote, "We've seen more than once that the public welfare may call upon the best citizens for their lives." Now, Oliver Wendell Holmes was a thrice wounded soldier in the Civil War. It would be strange if it could not call upon those who already sapped the strength of the state for these lesser sacrifices, often not felt to be much by those who are concerned, to prevent our being swamped by incompetence. It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or to let them starve to death for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is broad enough to cover cutting the fallopian tubes. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. So that kind of put the hair up in the back of my neck when I first read that. And happily, our success in World War II made this kind of thinking unpopular. So where do we go from here? So science, as it's currently understood, has looked at this. So the CDC and Kaiser in the late 1990s did a study involving 17,000 people. And they tried to correlate growing up in an adverse situation might have an effect on adult health. And so they asked people about their life experiences before they were 18 and then checked in with the status of their health as adults. They came up with a theory that they have an image of it that I don't have for you today that's a pyramid. So at the bottom is you have crappy things happen to you as a child. Because your brain is developing, you develop what we would call dysfunctional approaches to behavior, and it also has an effect on how your brain grows, how it hardwires. And that often will lead to bad habits, smoking, drinking, whatever. And this in turn causes high risk with disease, social problems, disability, and death as a consequence. So to be specific, the tools they use, they ask questions like, were you emotionally abused when you were growing up? Did a parent or a step-parent or adult living in your home swear at you, insult you, put you down, or acted in a way that made you afraid? They had a similar question about physical abuse, and basically it was about being threatened with fists, knives, leaving marks on your body. There were questions about sexual abuse. Another big one was a mother being observed to be abused, physical abuse, or threatened with death. Household substance abuse, was that in your family? Was there somebody with mental health problems that either did or did not include suicide attempts? Was there separation or divorce? Was there anyone in the family put in jail? Was there emotional neglect, which meant was there no one who helped you to make you feel special or loved or looked after? Or physical neglect? Was there no one to protect you, take you to the doctor, get you fed, get clothes on your back? So the maximum score on this was a 10. They found this most statistically significant were from 0 to 4 and above. And the first graph didn't take on the computer, but basically it demonstrated a couple things. So if we're 100 of us, it said 36% of us could write down none of those things happened to us. Only 36, 1 in 3. 26% had at least one of those things. 16% had 2. And 4 or more, 12% of the population. So more specifically, 10% said they were emotionally abused. Almost 30% had physical abuse growing up. 20% had sexual abuse, and if you divide it by gender, 24% of women. 12% had mothers who were ill-treated. Almost 30% had substance abuse in the family. 19% mental abuse. 23% divorce. And 10% physical neglect. So that's very interesting, it's sobering, and what do you make of it? So I think we have some graphs finding. Yes. Let's try it out. Boom, all right.
Oh boy.
So graphs, you know, it's not a PowerPoint, but I'm trying. So basically what you'll see is an ascending step, and it goes from no aces up to 5 and more aces. And so this one talks about alcoholism, so the risk goes from 2% in somebody with 0 score up to 16% if you have 4 or more. The other's about drug abuse, so 10% is the baseline, and it goes up to 45 or 35%. So your risk of drug abuse is significant. Let's go to the next one. This is much easier than pushing the button the wrong way.
Sure. For you.
Yeah, for me.
Oh, nice.
So you got the same steps. The purple is for people with depression. The blue is for people who have tried to commit suicide. So it goes up to 20%. So if you have a lot of these adverse childhood experiences, you have a 1 in 5 chance of trying to commit suicide sometime in your life. And then I think the last graph in tap is the one with the green. No, we don't have that. All right, I get.
Hold on.
Huh? Think, yeah?
Yeah.
No, let's save that. Go ahead and save that. That's So I'm a physician, not a psychiatrist. So what was of more interest to me on this is.
Hold on. Which one is sideways?
Oh no, yeah, no, it's the one. Yeah, no problem. But the one below it is what we want. Oh.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I love this.
I know it's fun. It's very exciting.
Like a video game.
All right, perfect. So this one has tangible medical problems we all recognize. So arthritis, your risk of having arthritis is 2.5 times the baseline if you have 4 or more of these adverse childhood experiences. Your risk of asthma, 2.5 times. Your risk of cancer, 1.5 times. Your risk of COPD is almost 4 times. The risk of diabetes is 2 times. Heart attack and heart disease are 2.5 times. Kidney disease, 2.5 times. Stroke, almost 3 times the risk. And problems with your vision, almost 4 times the risk. So does that make sense to anybody?
Can't see it. But everything else.
But it doesn't mean that it's causal.
No, it's a relationship, that's correct.
Right.
So if you go to the step of, well, can you explain it? One of the theories is people with adverse psychological events in their childhood often adapt bad behaviors. So smoking, that would get you to COPD.
Right.
Overeating would get you to diabetes and all the subsequent medical problems associated with that. So that's the thinking, that the bad behavior is stress relief. So smoking is stress relief, overeating is stress relief, drinking is stress relief, so on. So it even got, I'll give you just a few more details. Your risk of miscarriages goes up. Ischemic heart disease, liver disease, which would go with alcohol. Poor work performance, you can make an association with substance abuse and poor work performance, but also you just may not be able to focus very well. Financial stress, and that'll be the last slide. Unintended pregnancies, early initiation to smoking, drinking, and sexual behavior, unwanted pregnancies, the whole list of bad behaviors. So the last slide for Rich.
Yeah, let's see about that.
All right. So this one gets us back into social sciences, not psychology per se, and not medical problems per se.
It's sideways. I don't even know
It's
how
still
to do that.
sideways. It's all right. Go ahead.
Once you get out.
You can turn.
Everybody can turn their head.
How do I do that?
Little thing, top bar.
Top bar.
Far right.
No,
The middle. The middle.
Middle.
Oh, right there.
There you go. Boom.
Yeah.
from 0 to 4 or more, your risk of having a severe struggle with personal finances, it goes from baseline, I think, was 10%, and you go up to nearly 25% in your lifetime. So the ripples go psychological, physical, and then social.
Is there a direct correlation between ACEs scores and income level?
I don't have data on that. I would guess because of this, there probably is, yeah. So, you know, so if you're trying to think, well, how do you prevent this? What's clear is people that live in poverty tend to have higher ACEs scores. It's not automatic. I mean, in this room, I'm guessing several of us have a couple of these ACEs in our backgrounds. So they're not all that unusual. The resilience you get kind of depends on your environment, and I'll get back to that in a minute. So this is tough stuff. Actually, I was originally going to go, so thank you for having me today. Merry Christmas. But I'd like to talk a little bit about prevention, and I did not come up with very good stuff. So the focus is often on social support. So there's economic support. So people on the underside of the economy, you could argue that if you could find food stamps, a place to live, that sort of thing, you might be able to lower the scores here. Helping find people health care. So that's been a big focus with the Obamacare controversy. The idea was to try to get medical care to people that otherwise could not afford it. And the intent was it might soften the blow of the effectiveness. And from my point of view, it's about monitoring and trying to help problems as they arise. The other hidden agenda is if you suspect neglect or abuse, you're obliged to report it, and then you get into the social issues of, so if a social worker is aware that there are ACEs, what are the tools that they use? And they're limited. You know, unless you're egregiously abusing your children, there's no intervention. Education. So the idea is you try to give kids an opportunity to raise themselves, and education is thought to be a way to do that. So kids that are distracted at home, it's helpful if you can find a focus. So I'm thinking Boys and Girls Club is a great example of that. You want to change the norms in parenting, and so for social services doing outreach from the hospital, you might talk to young parents. I mean, I used to think when I was even a young adult that it's weird that you have to take a test to drive a car. You don't have to take a test to be a parent, and a lot of parents really suck at it. And so the idea is how do you improve on it? Because we live in a country where you don't tell people how to raise their children. And so social services will basically offer classes and incentives to try to get people to at least hear the message that it's not good to argue in front of your children, it's not good to abuse your wife or your children, and try to get that message across. And the data on that I found was pretty limiting. So they did what was called a marketing outreach. So basically there was a financial incentive for families to come and listen to an educational group of talks called Breaking the Cycle. And at the end of it, 44% of parents were thinking about contemplating a change in their behavior, and up to 16% who tried to stop yelling at, swearing, or putting their children down or fighting in front of their children. So the numbers weren't really stellar on that. So a conclusion I came to is the solutions to this are deep and societal, and the answers are contentious for a lot of people, but the evidence of cause-effect is a focus for attention and the benefits if we can improve on reducing these experiences. So one of my other passions is PTSD and combat veterans, and there was a great idea that I think has a parallel here. And basically, Dr. Shea is a VA psychiatrist in Philadelphia who wrote some books about PTSD and Vietnam veterans, and he came to believe that yes, those people come, you offer them medications, you offer them counseling, but basically if you want somebody to thrive, which is different than patch them up, they need three basic things to start doing that. They need safety, they need a safe environment, they need sobriety, and they need community. So community for veterans is actually funded and supported in a better way than we do for the general citizenry. How do you find community that's meaningful for people that are abused? It's hard. And last but not least, a personal anecdote. Years ago, Kearney and I met a woman who had a sales job at Nordstrom, and she did not have a high school diploma. She'd been thrown out of her family when she was 16 because she came out as a gay woman, and her parents would not tolerate that. So she lived in a car, working at Nordstrom's, kind of winging it, and we liked her, and we kind of took her under our wing. And I don't mean she lived with us, but we offer her supports. We encouraged her to go to school. She now has a master's. She gives a lot of credit for her working through that to us, which I don't think materially we deserve it, but she says, we were the first people to tell her she was capable of doing it. We gave her hope. And so her contribution to this discussion was to discuss hope theory, which I don't have time to talk about, but basically it has a very nice summary, which is, so this was addressed to social workers who are using this as a tool. It says, your programs have goals and desirable outcomes. Your programs are evidence-based, not just what you think works, but what has been shown to work. Best practice models unify the purpose. And the services you provide are pathways of hope for your clients, their children, and their families. Hope is a social gift in which our interactions with others matter. Hope can be contagious and can promote optimism and resilience, and that's how you help people thrive. And that's all I've got. Thank you. Officer Krupke, you got to look it up. Questions?
Questions?
Yeah, I was going to gloss that over.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So you were talking about the bad behavior indicators and things like that, and you kept saying as a response to stress. Could stress be considered a causing effect?
So I will say so stress is not a medical term. So I have to say people use that word fairly indiscriminately to describe lots of different things. So I think lots of things make us feel stressful. For some people, standing up in front of you would be extremely stressful, and it doesn't trouble a lot of us. So I would say yes, stress brings out physical reactions in a body, and if it happens over and over again, it is thought to have effects on your hormone system as well as how your brain interprets the world. So stress broadly defined, yes. If you want to get specific, it's a little trickier because it's like when I was reading about the combat veterans. You've got Max Cleland, who got his legs blown off in Vietnam, wound up being a legislator from Georgia, and by all accounts was a stand-up guy, really good guy. And then you have Lewis Puller, who was Chesty Puller's son, who ran the VA for a while, but he was an alcoholic and he ultimately killed himself. So what makes one person resilient and one person fail is tricky, though it's also clear that if you go into war as an 18 or a 20-year-old and you have a high ACE score, your resilience, if you face trauma, is not nearly as good as it would be if you had a lower score. So it has implications across the whole continuum of our society. Others, yes ma'am.
So I just want to defend my parents. I know I tell a lot of dumb jokes, but I have a perfect child. Okay, it was perfect. So my parents were not at fault for this.
Well, I think you should put that in your Christmas letter. Mr. Sprosky, yes.
I was just going to say, a group of attorneys and judges and sheriff's officers and probation officers all took the ACEs test as part of a continuing legal education class. And what we found was it was funny that a lot of people were either a 0 or 4 or greater. There weren't a lot of 1, 2, or 3 scores.
Oh, interesting.
And as we started talking about it, quite a few of us that were on the higher end maybe also discovered that was partly the motivating factor to go into that field or to be engaged. And so it was really interesting that in that room full you had a room full of people that are where they are because of either a very low score or a very high score.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting insight, and I have to say, I love those stories. Alger, the kid that made good.
Yeah, that guy.
In the Gilded.
Horatio Alger.
Horatio Alger, thank you. Different. I looked at you because I knew you would know.
Alger Hiss. Me.
Yeah, Alger Hiss was on spot, right? But so we live for those stories. It's in Hollywood, it's in novels, it's in all the things that kind of keep us going. But if you go evidence-based, so how many people are living in the homeless shelter, compared to the people that are in a law firm? I'm sure the ratio is pretty dramatically skewed. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So, we've all grown up with kids that ended up living in homes where their ACE score comes out very, very high.
Yeah.
Have there been any studies done where you got two grow up in the exact same environment with two entirely different outcomes?
Well, that happens a lot.
Yeah.
So
it's happened in my daughter-in-law's family.
When you think of siblings living in the same household, how different they can be. I don't know if there have been twin studies that go to stuff like risk of drug use or risk of being homeless or suicide. I know that schizophrenia and depression often link very tightly to genetics in twins. It's hard to know, to project that out to the general population. If someone's depressed, how much of that is just the way they are and how much of that is because of their experience. You know, nature and nurture is always an argument. And in my experience, it waxes and wanes in its popularity. Sometimes everyone's kind of on the genetic side, and other times, you know, a decade later, they may be more on the environment. So I don't know how to answer that.
Well, and I guess my question was more to in my daughter-in-law's family. My daughter-in-law, she made the decision when she was a teenager, I am not going to be like this.
Right.
And she is an awesome person.
Correct.
Her sister, on the other, one of her sisters, on the other hand, decided to dive down into the hole and ended up dying of an overdose at 29.
Yeah.
Same environment, two completely different outcomes.
You know, I remember a psychiatrist talking about depression, and he laughingly said, you take two kids who grew up in the same household, same parents, and so you can argue about the kids may be treated differently, but basically, if they even recount an event, you know, when grandma knocked the Christmas tree over, you know, when we were 5, he talks about how if somebody's depressed, they'll remember that in the most negative connotation they can, and a person who's not depressed will remember the exact same event but have a positive spin on it, you know. So that's complicated. I mean, so I believe people can live in the same environment, draw different conclusions, draw different strengths from their experiences, and go in completely different directions. I think it's very common. I almost expect it. Actually, I have a theory that kids, the younger sibling has to differentiate himself from the first one, or the parents won't value them if they're the same. What's the point? You got two, you know. So they got a different, I think there's a biological drive to make yourself different than your sibling, for whatever that's worth.
Sure. All my siblings were crazy.
Yeah. Anything else? Yes, sir.
I'm with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and most of the kids that we work with have high ACE scores, 0 to 4 and above. You alluded to a mentoring situation with that young lady. How do you feel that mentoring fits into helping these kids that are on this path that may turn their direction? We feel very strongly that it has a great effect on it, but I was just curious from your
I think it does. So there's formal mentoring, and then there's having a connection with sort of the subtle effect that has, and I think you need a little of both. So I've talked to people that have given up and try to reinforce the idea that you can do this, and I feel like I'm talking to a wall. And other people, you just say a sentence the right way, and it triggers something in them, and they're inspired by it. So to me, it's nebulous. You try all those things, but so I think mentoring is very important, and I think setting up formally is more useful than just hoping for the best. Yeah, yes, sir.
So, briefly, I remember this sociological study that really impressed me, Margaret Mead, that they took it from the other end. Everybody was saying at the time that all these bad behaviors, all these bad things that happen to you in your childhood are going to make you end up being a criminal. And they decided that because they surveyed all the criminals in prisons, and that's in fact what happened, that all these people had terrible upbringings. But then they reversed that, and they looked at it the other way, and they did a long longitudinal study on people who had all of those bad things happen to them, but turned out really, really good. And the defining factor was that the people who turned out better, more adjusted, whatever, had encountered at least one adult in their life, whether it be an uncle, a cousin, a mentor, or whatever, and that adult was able to say to that child, life works.
Yeah.
Life works for you. You don't have to go this way life works. And so that's why it's so important what Big Brothers and Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Club, and all these organizations are doing. Intervening at an early age to help kids know that life can work, that life does work. It's not all.
Actually, yes, the Dr. Shea from the Philadelphia PA says something like that, which is, I'm a civilian, I'm working with these Vietnam vets, I'm 10 years younger than them, and at first, everything I said, they regarded with suspicion. It took a long time for them to accept him, and it's much easier to have somebody from not just the background, you know, you've got soldiers from Alabama and Minnesota in the same room, but the idea is that they went through a combat experience that was different, but it was the same, and that's actually the community, he thinks, where the people that are succeeding, who do just what you said, no, you can flourish in this life, here's what I've learned, and they'll take that and run with it, whereas the psychiatrist saying the exact same thing gets nowhere. So community, I swear, I've talked to some homeless people in the last month, and I have lots. I have no idea how to help somebody who's homeless find that community. All right, thank you.
All right. Move on.
Okay, election results. Wow, we've had a close one here. This was really tight. Recount. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate, this will be, we'll call them elected for next year's officers, elected Director Madeline White.
Yay!
Current and elected Treasurer Mike Jones.
Yay, Mike Jones!
There was a jelly protest, I just want to stress that, but pulling it off despite the jelly protest, our current and incoming Secretary, Barbara Perez.
Yeah.
Vice President, Amanda Bay. And I just want to say on the president that there was one vote for anybody else. Now, I don't know who that exactly is, but that person did get a vote, so I just want to stress that.
We're all winners.
All I have to say is you did this to yourselves, me as president for next year.
All right.
Now, I just did want to say real quick, we have a couple extra minutes that I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you, I am humbled, I'm honored, and I'm so psyched. I mean, it's a great opportunity to be in that position. I'll certainly talk a lot more when we have our, I always call it change of command ceremony, but the installation dinner that we have in June.
Induction.
The induction dinner, thank you, thank you.
Right, all right.
But,
Horatio.
But I do want to say that one thing I'm hoping for is everybody can have as much engagement as they want in this club. And if you're looking to take a leadership role, if you're looking to be a part of a committee, I'm going to be trying to find everybody and try to get in contact with everybody in the club just to see where you are, what's going on, and what you want to do in the club. And please, take that opportunity to say, you know what, I've always wanted to be involved in membership, but Madeline refuses to come talk to me. Or, but I'd like to take a leadership role. I'd like to go up and do the vice president and run the BBB as a president-elect and then be in the presidential chain. I'd like to be involved in that. If that's something you want to do in this club, I want to know that. So that's going to be a big part of what I do, going around just finding out what your interest is. If your interest is, I like to show up on Wednesdays, meet up with all my friends, maybe show up to a social, that's really where I'm at right now, great. But if there's something else you want to do, we want to know, and I think it's important. And I just want to stress that the presidential chain it really is a great honor because it's a fun position to be in. I'm sure that our current president would certainly say that, past presidents will say that there's kind of the joke about, well, the BBB, you have to put it together. You know what? It was a fun event. It was a great event to put on. It's a great exercise to do. So I encourage anybody who has any interest to at least talk to some of the past presidents, talk to those who are involved right now, and find out if that's something you want to do. So, in my role of just being the guy coming up and making election results, I actually have the great honor right now to announce our Sergeant at Arms. Yay! Let's put it together for Jim.